So, with YouTube launching their new channel for unboxings, usually their tools, equipment, things of that nature, I thought I would do one today about this router bit that I bought for planing down large slabs. Now, for the last 6 months or so, I've been using these Bosch 3/4 inch by 1.5 inch router bits, and these are around $25 or so from Lowe's, and they work pretty well, especially when they're new out of the box, and they're really sharp. But lately I've gotten into much larger slabs, and when you're flattening something that's relatively small, then it's not that big of a deal to use a 3/4 inch bit like this. And unfortunately, neither Lowe's nor Home Depot really sell anything much bigger than this. You can get a little bit longer, but then it drops down to like 1/2 inch, something along those lines. So I decided that I really needed to get something that was going to be larger. I have a tabletop sitting over there that I need to flatten. It's 36 inches wide and it's 84 inches long. And I don't want to spend, a day or day and a half trying to flatten it with one of these. So I kind of bit the bullet a little bit and said, I'll order a larger bit, like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, something along those lines. And so I went to check them out. Woodcraft didn't have any in stock that I could just go buy. So I checked Amazon and started looking around. I really wanted to see how they'd work out first before I really invested some serious money in them. And as some of you may know, with those larger bits that are for flattening slabs and what have you, 2 inches, 1.75 inches, 2.5 inches, etc. The good bits, the really good ones, like the fly cutters and what have you, can run you $250, $300 or more. And don't get me wrong, they are worth it. They are absolutely worth it, especially when you're looking at a lot of figured material. But for this foray into doing that, I don't use my router sled very often to actually flatten things. Most things I can use the jointer on and then glue into panels. But lately, I've had to do a couple of items, and these just were not getting it. And I have multiples because one of these I now use for doing mortises and rabbets on the sides of softwoods because it's getting dull and it's got a little bit of a nick in it. Whereas this one I've been using for probably 4 or 5 months now, and it's still working, but like I said, it's just not big enough. So in order to not spend a ton of money and just try to get something that I can get through this project with, if it's not great, I spent $16, $17, it's virtually disposable. And so I looked on Amazon and I bought this Uxcell 1.5 inch, 1/2 inch by 2 inch router bit. And so I received it today in the packaging. Just about everything other than the name of the company, which is apparently Tideway, and the advertising text of TCT router bits, professional quality, and the dimensions. I don't know if you can see that there. Just about everything is written in, I'm guessing, Mandarin, even on the back. So I'm going to have to do some referencing. I'm going to have to look up and see what max speeds this thing can operate at. But I have not opened this package yet, even though it's not technically sealed. I wanted to open that on camera and do an evaluation of this bit versus the Bosch bits that I'm currently using. So right away, inside of the packaging, I can see that the head of this bit, not the blades, but the head of this bit was not machined very well. I'll say that. I mean, what can you expect for, I think it was a $16 bit. And it was Prime eligible, so I didn't have to pay shipping. But, I didn't expect the greatest thing in the world, but I expected at least some decent quality of it. And just looking at it through the plastic case, I can see that there are malformations on the head itself. And so I'm going to open it up, and I'm actually going to pull it out of here, if I can, without cutting myself. Okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. So, as usual, it's coated in the standard Chinese gunk that comes on just about everything metal that comes out of China nowadays. And looking at the bit, at the blade in and of itself, it looks, I don't see any nicks or cracks in it, but there is a burr. I can feel that. It looks like there's a burr on pretty much every single edge that's here. It looks like, well, I mean, I can't necessarily really tell very well if the carbide teeth were bonded to this head very well or not, because it looks like they bonded it and then they painted over it. So if there are any cracks or anything in there, I can't see them because of the paint. And the air compressor kicks on. Sorry about that. Air compressor kicked on. It happens. The shaft looks pretty solid. I mean, it's just a piece of turned round bar. But the cutter head, I'm not really going to stress about it too much. Of course, there are some nicks and scratches in there already. And you can see here, as well as up here, where the machining of this wasn't done exceptionally well. It does not look like the two carbide cutters. This may be very hard to see here in this light, but if you look right in here and right there at the point, it looks like the carbide cutter teeth are not bonded together either. But that may not be necessarily a big deal. My worry is, especially with using something that costs $16 out of China, is that I start spinning this thing around at 27,000 RPMs or whatever it is. I'll have to reference it because, well, I don't read, I guess, Mandarin. Well, that's a lot of metal to be spinning around at that velocity. And so I worry that I start spinning this sucker around and it starts coming apart. And one thing I do want to check, because I've had this happen before with bits, is that the teeth of the bits as well as the head are square to the shaft. Now, I've ordered bits before and bought bits right off the shelf that shouldn't have made it through QA because they've gone up into the shaft, and then I've started to use it, and what you can't see with the naked eye generally is a slight shift in the bit, and when you start to cut, instead of it cutting flat, you get a slight angle. And so I want to try to check using my square here and my eyeball. And we're going to see. Looks pretty square as far as the cutter head goes. There's a little bit of a gap on my side here, but that looks to be from the machining and not because the head's out of square. I'm also going to check the cutter, and the cutter head, you can barely see that towards the center there's a gap. So it looks like it slopes in towards the center from these outside points. And that's not necessarily a problem. Most of your cutting is going to be done out here and not in here. And if you're driving this bit into a piece of wood where both sides of the cutting bit are going to be cutting, and you're planning on this point actually cutting and making it level with everything else, then number one, you're doing it wrong. Stop. With a very small bit, something like one of these little spiral cutter bits, you know, it's not as big of an issue. It can grab and take the router away from you. But with something of this size, or even this size, it will take it away from you, and you are adding massive amounts of risk to what it is that you're doing. So with something like this, you're going to start at an edge and you're going to work your way across. You're going to just plow this thing in there, and you're going to take very shallow passes with it. Otherwise, you're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to hurt somebody around you, or you're going to ruin your workpiece. The only other thing that I look at here is this bit, as I said before. I have to check it, make sure. Oop, it's this one. Yeah, so this is my rabbiting bit. This is my flattening bit. I can definitely say here and now that this bit that I've been using for, I think, about 4 months now for flattening, and that's oak, cherry, walnut, pine, poplar, you name it. This bit, after 4 months of use, and you can see it's been used, feels sharper still than this bit brand new out of the packaging. Now, that just may be the burr that's on there, and once that burr comes off, then it might be really sharp. But we'll have to see. Time will tell on that. Anyway, I'm going to get to using this in just a little while, and I'll probably post an update as to whether or not this was worth the $16 and the day that I had to wait to get it. I can say now that, you know, you see places like this on a router bit where the head was dinged or scraped up by something. I mean, that's probably a 32nd of an inch chunk by a 16th of an inch that's been taken out of the top of this bit. And it's almost on both sides here. There's that part right there as well. But that, I'm not sure, is really going to necessarily affect the use of the bit. So I will update later on with how well it worked, and also place a link in the description to this specific item on Amazon that I ordered, so that you all can see which one it is and whether or not you want to spend your $16 on it. Thanks, guys.